Back in the 1970s, if there was a man the West was scared of, it was Idi Amin Dada, Uganda's military leader and third president. However, for the West, he was a brutal dictator who had to be eliminated, in the same sense as the West deemed Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein dictators. Therefore, instead of showing what Idi Amin did for his country, the Western media focused more on his brutal side of getting things done, no matter how. Yet, it is not true that he was soft and preferred negotiations over force. However, it's hard to conclude whether he was a dictator or a revolutionary leader who wanted good for his country. This can only be known if we see what he did as a president. So, what was a day in the life of Idi Amin Dada was like? Welcome to a new episode of Black Afric Diary, a channel where we talk about Black African history, culture, arts, and civilization. It's a place where you will see the real picture of Black Africa, its stories, and the events defining it. In this episode, we will tell you about Uganda's military leader and president, Idi Amin Dada, and how he spent his days in power. Let's get started. Idi Amin Dada's day would begin well before dawn, driven by a deep sense of spirituality and discipline. Rising early, he would perform his morning prayers as a devout Muslim, seeking divine guidance to handle the complexities of the day ahead. Interestingly, Amin saw himself as a chosen leader, which fueled his reliance on spiritual practices to maintain his grip on Uganda. But Amin's spirituality was not limited to Islam alone. Deeply influenced by his upbringing in a world steeped in African mysticism, he often combined his Islamic faith with traditional rituals. As threats against him grew, both real and imagined, he increasingly turned to these rituals for protection. Amin's belief in the power of spirits and omens drove him to consult traditional healers who interpreted his dreams. To him, these dreams were more than just subconscious thoughts. They were suspicions that could dictate life and death decisions. If a dream suggested betrayal, it wasn't uncommon for Amin to order the immediate arrest or even execution of those he suspected. After his morning prayers and rituals, Amin would shift his focus to strategy. The early hours were a time for solitude, allowing him to reflect on the political challenges he faced and plan his next moves. Amin was a leader who mixed faith with political calculation. He understood that staying in power required both divine favor and a ruthless approach. As the sun began to rise, Amin would transition into intense morning meetings with his inner circle of advisors and military leaders. One of his key missions as Uganda's leader was to break free from the lingering grip of colonial influence that had shaped the nation's political and economic framework. Amin's disdain for the British, whom he accused of exploiting Uganda, drove him to reclaim the country's sovereignty, not just in a symbolic sense, but in tangible economic reforms. During these meetings, Amin was laser-focused on strategies to dismantle what he saw as neo-colonial economic control. His policies aimed to reduce Uganda's dependence on Western aid and promote self-reliance by empowering local Ugandans to own and control their resources. This would later cause the Western countries to spread propaganda about him. One of his most controversial but boldest moves was the expulsion of the Asian community in 1972. The Asians, mostly of Indian descent, had dominated Uganda's trade and commerce sectors. Amin framed this drastic measure as a way to redistribute economic power to indigenous Ugandans. Supporters saw it as a step toward economic independence, while critics argued that it was a reckless act that threw the economy into chaos. The decision to expel Asians was sudden and came with a 90-day ultimatum for them to leave the country. Amin framed this as a bold step towards economic independence, arguing that their departure would free up businesses and wealth for Ugandans. The properties, shops, and enterprises left behind were seized by the state and handed over to local citizens, which initially won him praise from those who felt economically marginalized. However, the expulsion had devastating consequences. The Asians were skilled business owners, and without their expertise, many of the redistributed businesses quickly faltered. Supply chains broke down, inflation soared, and Uganda's economy began to crumble. What Amin had envisioned as a path to self-reliance turned into a period of economic chaos. Shortages became common, and the country struggled to recover from the abrupt loss of its entrepreneurial class. Despite the economic turmoil, Amin remained resolute in his belief that expelling the Asians was a necessary step toward building a truly independent Uganda. He saw himself as a warrior against neo-colonialism, determined to reclaim control over the nation's resources. Yet, his heavy-handed policies, driven by a mix of nationalism and personal vendettas, often backfired, leaving Uganda isolated and struggling to sustain itself. Amin's rhetoric during these strategy sessions was filled with anti-Western sentiment. He positioned himself as the defender of Uganda's rights, encouraging his people to reject foreign domination and take pride in their national identity. His plans included nationalizing banks, setting up state-owned enterprises, and boosting agricultural self-sufficiency. However, despite some initial success, these policies were plagued by poor execution and corruption, which often led to economic instability and widespread shortages. In these morning meetings, Amin's duality was on full display. On one hand, he was a leader who genuinely wanted to uplift Uganda by dismantling the remains of colonial rule. On the other, his obsession with absolute control drove him to take extreme measures that often backfired, undermining his own objectives. As the morning turned into day, Amin would step out to face Uganda with a mix of fierce determination and unpredictable ferocity, seeing himself as both a protector of his people and a ruthless enforcer of his will. In the early morning hours, Idi Amin would often step out into the bustling streets of Kampala, taking unplanned walks that allowed him to connect directly with the people. These strolls were not just about exercise, but were part of Amin's strategy to cultivate an image of a leader who was both approachable and genuinely invested in the lives of everyday Ugandans. Dressed in simple attire, he would move through the markets, stopping to chat with vendors, laborers, and passers-by. He asked about their families, listened to their concerns, and sometimes even made promises to address their grievances. For those who interacted with him, these moments were a rare glimpse of a ruler who seemed to care. Amin was a master of optics and understood the power of these public appearances. By interacting with ordinary citizens, he distanced himself from the aloofness of previous regimes, positioning himself as a leader of the people. His towering presence and charm endeared him to many, who saw in him a symbol of national pride. However, these interactions served a dual purpose. Amin was not just listening, he was also observing, assessing the mood of his citizens, and ensuring that loyalty remained strong. He knew that gathering information firsthand was far more reliable than depending on reports from his often untrustworthy inner circle. Yet, the charm was a double-edged sword. Many Ugandans were careful during these encounters, aware that a wrong word could be reported back to his ever-watchful security apparatus. The same man who greeted children and laughed with merchants could, with a single command, turn lives upside down. Behind his public persona as a charismatic leader, Amin's mornings were also dominated by a relentless focus on securing his grip on power. His early hours often began with tense security briefings, where intelligence officers and military leaders reported on the latest threats, real or imagined. Amin's paranoia was noticeable, especially after surviving several coup attempts. He viewed these meetings as critical to staying one step ahead of any potential plots against him. Amin's distrust extended even to those closest to him. During these briefings, he would interrogate his advisors, demanding to know if anyone in his circle was hesitating in their loyalty. Those suspected of disloyalty were dealt with swiftly and ruthlessly. Amin's fear of betrayal drove him to order crackdowns on dissenters, resulting in widespread arrests and brutal interrogations. The slightest hint of discontent, even an offhand comment, could lead to public executions or disappearances. This daily cycle of paranoia and brutality became a defining feature of Amin's reign. He believed that maintaining power required not just the loyalty of his inner circle, but also the submission of the entire population. The morning prayers that began his day, seeking divine protection, often ended with decisions that brought bloodshed. It was this duality, a leader who invoked divine guidance while ordering brutal repression, that defined the contradictions of his rule. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Idi Amin, despite his controversial reputation, was genuinely passionate about promoting African pride and identity. By midday, after the intensity of his early morning activities, he often shifted his focus toward cultural revival. Amin firmly believed that for Uganda to truly gain independence from its colonial past, it needed to embrace its African roots. To him, reclaiming Uganda's cultural heritage was not just symbolic, it was a practical way to instill national pride and unity. Amin regularly held meetings with musicians, artists, and cultural leaders to discuss how to uplift Ugandan arts and traditions. Under his leadership, the government launched state-sponsored festivals showcasing local music, dance, and traditional crafts. These festivals aimed to revive cultural practices that colonial rule had suppressed. Amin was particularly invested in supporting Ugandan film and music industries, believing that such creative outlets could serve as a means of reclaiming African identity. To further his vision, he encouraged the use of local languages in schools and media, promoting a sense of national pride in the country's indigenous languages rather than relying solely on English. Then came the most important task of the day, safeguarding his power, a task that he approached with relentless paranoia. Afternoons were typically reserved for high-stakes meetings with his intelligence officers and military commanders. Reports from his intelligence operatives about suspected plots or dissent were a regular part of these sessions. Amin's paranoia, fueled by past coup attempts, often led to ruthless interrogations. He personally oversaw or even participated in questioning those he suspected of betrayal. These interrogations frequently escalated into torture, as Amin was convinced that loyalty could only be secured through fear. His methods were brutal, ranging from severe beatings to psychological torment, ensuring that even his closest associates feared stepping out of line. For those accused of disloyalty, the repercussions were severe and often swift. Arrests, torture, and even executions were common outcomes of these afternoon security meetings. These tactics created an atmosphere of terror that permeated every level of Ugandan society, from his inner circle to ordinary citizens. While these brutal measures effectively crushed dissent, they also left a lasting scar on Uganda, making the late afternoon synonymous with dread and uncertainty for anyone who might be perceived as a threat. Despite the atmosphere of fear and repression, Idi Amin's government did undertake important infrastructure projects aimed at improving life for ordinary Ugandans. As the afternoon gave way to evening, Amin often turned his attention to development initiatives that he believed would harden his legacy. He was acutely aware that to maintain popular support, he needed to back up his nationalist rhetoric with visible improvements to the country's infrastructure. Under his rule, Uganda saw a push to expand roads, hospitals, and schools, particularly in the underserved rural areas. Recognizing the urgent need for better health care, Amin oversaw the construction of hospitals and clinics, which brought medical services to remote communities that had previously lacked access. He also prioritized education, commissioning the building of new schools and expanding existing ones to accommodate a growing population eager for learning. Amin believed that a strong, self-reliant Uganda needed to be both healthy and educated. The expansion of Uganda's road network was another key focus. By connecting remote regions to major cities, Amin aimed to stimulate trade and improve agricultural productivity, boosting the national economy. These projects were not only about development, but also about demonstrating that his government could deliver on its promises. For many Ugandans, the new infrastructure represented real progress and brought a sense of hope. Amin also took steps to uplift Uganda's economy, particularly in agriculture. Recognizing the potential for self-sufficiency, he initiated programs to boost food production and support rural farmers. By focusing on agriculture, Amin sought to reduce Uganda's dependence on foreign imports and ensure food security for the nation. Under his directives, the government provided resources like seeds, equipment, and training to farmers. These policies led to boosts in agricultural output, benefiting rural communities that had long been neglected. However, corruption and poor planning often undermined these initiatives, leading to mixed results. Still, for many Ugandans, Amin's agricultural policies were a rare positive aspect of his rule, leaving a complex legacy in the countryside. During the afternoons, Idi Amin would often dedicate time to hosting foreign diplomats and envoys, using these meetings to strengthen Uganda's position on the global stage. Despite his reputation as a ruthless leader, Amin had a surprising knack for diplomacy. He was charismatic and could effortlessly switch into the role of a statesman when the situation called for it, impressing foreign representatives with his charm and bold vision for Uganda. Amin's strategy was to leverage the Cold War tensions between the West and the Soviet bloc. He knew how to play both sides, securing financial aid, military support, and trade deals by pitting one against the other. He was particularly successful in forming ties with Middle Eastern and Eastern European countries, who saw value in Uganda's strategic location and resources. These diplomatic efforts were not just about gaining resources, they were a way for Amin to assert his nation's sovereignty and maintain his own legitimacy as a leader on the world stage. However, behind the smiles and handshakes, Amin remained deeply suspicious, convinced that foreign powers might be plotting his downfall. As the sun began to set, Amin's focus would shift to the military, which he both relied on and feared. His evenings were often spent visiting military barracks or convening with top officers. Amin, having risen through the military ranks himself, had a genuine appreciation for soldiers. He would personally inspect troops, review their equipment, and engage in friendly conversations, making him appear approachable and relatable to the rank and file. Yet, beneath this connection lay a deep paranoia. Amin's fear of betrayal was ever present, leading him to suspect even his most trusted generals. To maintain loyalty, he employed both rewards and punishments. Loyal soldiers were handsomely rewarded with promotions, land, or money, while those suspected of dissent faced severe repercussions, often without concrete evidence. These evening inspections were not just about boosting morale, but also served as a reminder of who held absolute power. As darkness fell, so did Amin's fears intensify. Nighttime was when his paranoia truly took hold, fueled by reports from his intelligence operatives about potential threats to his regime. These late-night hours often turned into sessions of ruthless decision-making, where Amin would order arrests, interrogations, and even executions, driven by his fear of conspiracies. Amin's impulsive decisions were often based on rumors rather than concrete evidence. If he suspected someone of disloyalty, they were swiftly dealt with, sometimes detained, sometimes killed, often without any formal trial. His secret police roamed the streets at night, carrying out his orders, leaving Ugandans in a constant state of fear. For many, the approach of the night brought the fear of a sudden knock on the door, signaling an arrest or worse. Despite his notorious public persona, Idi Amin was a different man behind closed doors. Late in the evening, after the day's intense political dealings, he would retreat to his home to spend time with his family. Those close to him saw a surprisingly affectionate and playful side, a contrast to the dictator known for his ruthlessness. Amin had multiple wives and a large family, with at least 40 children, a source of immense pride for him. Dinner time was often filled with laughter as he shared stories and life lessons with his children. These moments of warmth showed a more human side to a man otherwise known for his brutal rule. However, even in the comfort of his home, Amin's paranoia never entirely faded. He remained vigilant, always wary of betrayal, even from those closest to him. Idi Amin's legacy remains deeply divided. On one hand, he made genuine efforts to uplift Uganda, promoting self-sufficiency, cultural pride, and infrastructure development. Many, particularly in rural areas, appreciated his focus on local industries and support for agriculture. His push for Ugandan sovereignty, away from foreign control, was seen by some as a bold step toward true independence. On the other hand, his rule was marked by extreme brutality, paranoia, and violence. His fear-driven tactics led to thousands of deaths, creating a climate of terror that stifled any dissent. Nighttime raids, secret police operations, and public executions became the hallmark of his reign. However, most of the news about his brutality was spread by the West. In other words, the West was more interested in his brutal tactics. And this makes Ahmed Sékou Touré, the first president of Guinea, quote, relevant. If the colonists praise you, it means you are doing something wrong. If they speak ill of you, it means you are doing something good. The day they approve of me, that will mean I have betrayed you. Today, Uganda's memory of Idi Amin remains conflicted. Some see him as a champion who stood up to Western influence, while others cannot forget the bloodshed and fear he inflicted upon the nation. What do you think while being open-minded? Was Idi Amin Dada a dictator or a leader who wanted good for Uganda? Isn't it true that he used hard power to do things, but people remember him in good words in Uganda today? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on Idi Amin and what else you know about him. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.